Let's start with Coach White. He's been at San Diego State. He's been at Syracuse, been at Arizona State, and he's been at Nebraska, among other places. He's a well-traveled coach. 3-3-5 defense. If you don't know what that means, you can look up a lot of different things online, but here's the basis of it. And to be honest, one of the things that I was really excited to hear, because that defense historically is not the friendliest to learn. I've denoted that on other podcasts here at Locked On Seminoles here recently in the last couple of days. But he made a statement that just made like the heavens opened, because I wish more coaches would take this approach. It is not your scheme. It is the players that matter. The old saying, it's not the X's and the O's, it's the Jimmies and the Joes. Lee Corso on ESPN's famous show in the mornings on Saturday talked about that a lot, but so do many other people. You need to have the best player. And Bowden, one of his things, they said all the time, he get asked, what's the key to your program? Well, I always figured if I had better players than you, I'd probably win, which is true. You get the best players and you can adapt to them with your scheme. So let me find the comment here. When you look at Florida State historically, obviously defense is well known anyway, but personnel packages, we're going to use different packages for individuals. I want to say that again. We're going to use different personnel packages for individuals. He went in depth, and I'm just sitting here scribbling as he's going through his press conference, and I recorded. I might add some more on tomorrow's pod, but Coach White impressed me with that because he's a very well-known coordinator based on what I've read, the statistics and all of that. And maybe tomorrow I'll go into more depth with Nebraska's defense over the last couple of years. But he impressed me with that because so many guys, especially the old school 3-3 defensive line or 3-3-5 or 3-4, they really don't want to change much. That's my experience with those coaches. Him openly admitting like what he was going to do, because the question was pretty open-ended. Tony could have answered it any way he wanted. And he was just like, we're going to be multiple. That was his words. And he brought up another key point. He used Gus as an example. He goes, that guy's been coaching a long time. If you think you're going to come out and run the same defense over and over again for a whole game against today's offenses, you're wrong. Like the expression on Coach White's face truly set the tone. He knew that it's a challenge against today's offenses unless you could really kind of confuse them and make them feel uncomfortable. If you're not trying in some capacity to confuse the offense in today's world, I completely agree, you're in trouble. And it's a little bit easier with the three-man line because you got more moving parts at the second level, meaning linebackers and safeties, depending on how you want to label them. And Coach White went into that a little bit too, but the personnel packages will differ, and they're just now getting into it. Malzahn mentioned this too. They're evaluating the current talent, and Coach White said, especially the back end, he said it like 3-4 times. He was really impressed with the defensive backs that the Noles have. He liked some of the size and athleticism of some of the players coming back up front. The linebackers he knew were younger. They're going to have to coach them up. I get the sense just by his body language, he knows they've got work to do there, but Florida State fans do that anyway. That's not a newsflash. Coach White's just being introduced to it. You got to remember that. He was in Nebraska this past season, but like Omar Graham's in the portal, etc. I expect Florida State, if they're going to spend some money, there's going to be a linebacker, whether it's a Nebraska player, maybe multiple that come from Nebraska, other places, they're going to need to hit linebacker. You could tell what he was saying. They got to coach some guys up, but they need some depth and more playmakers there too. It's not one or the other, it's both. So I was very happy with his honesty, his ability to be in really just somebody that's transformational. You can't just accept that the personnel you had at Nebraska is going to be pigeonholed into running that same scheme at Florida State because the players aren't the same. They weren't recruited for the same fit in the same scheme. So that's really important. Also, here are a couple other things that I really liked about it, because he was asked, okay, why Florida State? Why would you come now? And he was A to B about it. This was also refreshing. Thank the Lord for somebody for being so honest here. Historical program, and it's been historical recently. And he went over and over and over again the following comment. The area around here to recruit. He brought up something that's also true about his three-man line and his fronts. it's historically difficult to recruit those. I've talked about that before too. You need bigger body types. Everybody wants them. There's only so many, and it's far, far, far lower than the number of players that there are to the need. Like there needs to be 100 of these guys a year. There's like 15 to 20 in the country that can come in and make an impact, that have the natural size, the natural length, the natural mentality, that have been coached, that can two-gap, all that kind of stuff. And that's also why he brought up having to change your defense to the players. They may run more of a one-gap three-man line this year, but they might adapt because they do have some bigger bodies at Florida State, like Denise White. Just as an example, as somebody, as he's redshirted this year, maybe next year he's ready to play some, and they run more of a zero tech. And he will adapt to that, but he knows he can get more of those players down south. Think about where Florida State has recruited historically. Florida, Alabama, Georgia, the Carolinas, occasionally a kid from the Virginia Beach area or D.C., mixing one or two from Texas, maybe a California kid, and every now and again a Chicago player, Pittsburgh player, something like that. But it's pretty rare. Most of those kids are down south. Tony has done his research. He knows at Florida State it's easier to get the defensive players. You'd be amazed, truly amazed, how many coaches don't understand the difference between football in the South and other areas because it's such a cultural deal. It's a huge deal. There's a kid here locally where I live. It's going to Auburn. His dad didn't want him to play basketball anymore because he didn't want him to lose weight. He knew he was a future defensive lineman. He was right. The kid weighs 325 pounds now. He's going to go be an interior defensive lineman for Auburn. It's a different mentality down here. That's the kind of kids that you can recruit at Florida State within the 300-mile radius of Tallahassee. It's very, very important that he understands that. Let's talk about incorporating the personnel. I already brought it up anyway with the 3-3-5. This is so important. Players, incorporate all the talent and personnel that you have. He's run four-man fronts. For those of you that don't like the three-man line, you're going to see it, but he's going to run it in what I would consider four different ways, maybe five, depending on how you want to talk about it. You have a true three-man front. You'll have a stand-up guy on the edge. They call it a jack at Nebraska. And he said, he brought this up because somebody asked the question. The personnel, the names of the position could change. Like they called it the Tillman position, like the rover at Arizona State, because, Pat Tillman's a famous player that died for our country in combat. But there could be, that's to me still a four-man line. The guy's standing up. Is he rushing the passer? It's still a four-man line. It's just where he's lined up and he's at a 2-point stand instead of 3. Who cares? That being said, you're going to see what they call a double eagle. It's something Georgia ran a few years ago against Bryce Young and Bama in the national title game. Both outside backers up on the line. And you'll also just see a flat-out four-man line at some point. And you'll probably see some different things with how they line up the four-man line, meaning there'll be some even fronts, two-man kind of situations where you're still two-gapping, or they'll play gaps and shoot one gap and go up. You're going to see all that based on what Florida State has year to year. I believe that with Kevin Wynn, Denise White, and some of these other guys they have in the younger players at Florida State, you're going to see Florida State be able to do more stuff right off the bat than what Coach White probably knew. That's the good news. That doesn't mean they don't need more players from the portal. They got Williams and different guys coming in on Monday this next week. Huge for Florida State to get them. But right now, I am very, very happy with Coach White. And one last thing on him. They asked him about practice. What do you want to do and all that? He says, basically, you play like you practice. You want to be physical? Well, you got to do it in practice. I think Florida State is going to hit more than most teams in practice. That is my feeling based on Tony's press conference. And that is huge for Florida State football, because if you don't do that and you're going to go beat Clemson or Miami, or like they got Notre Dame again coming, they got Alabama next year, you can't play against those teams without being a line of scrimmage football team. You have no chance. He knows that. You're going to practice it to see the results. Very, very impressed with Coach White.